All right, guys, so part 3 of this beast of a series, talking about where bands make the most sense, where maybe less banding makes a little more sense, less bands make sense, and where banding makes no sense. We're getting to the take home here why on most converging presses, especially most plate loading converging presses, banding really doesn't make much sense. Again, for the notion of efficiency. So this is part 3. I'm going to demonstrate here with this little drawing like a typical converging press. Obviously, there's varying degrees of this. Some of the handles might come together a lot, so they might actually, if we're looking at, let's call this horizontal travel to make it consistent, they might actually travel 12 inches. Some of them might just converge a little bit. The concepts will hold true. And then I'll even explain real briefly at the end why it makes even less sense for some plate loaded stuff, particularly most hammer strength stuff. And where maybe for a selectorized machine it wouldn't make as much of a difference, but for like hammer strength stuff, it makes double no sense to use a band, again with a very specific goal as the exception. So if you haven't watched already, make sure you watch part 1 more than anything else. If you're just hopping on here and you want to say, should I band a converging chest press? And then I start to talk about a whole bunch of seemingly complicated stuff, and you're like, this is stupid, I don't like this, then you didn't watch my disclaimer in video 1, because I totally get it if you're not into it, but if you want a deeper understanding, welcome, come watch. We talked about in the first one, basically, the reason that bands or accommodating resistance properly set up makes sense is for this stacking effect, meaning at the bottom, the line of force is very far away from the train joint. At the top, again, we're just talking for this movement, but most movements, it basically stacks, so the line of force passes through the joint, the moment arm is small or nothing, and just basically as a result of torque being so challenging at one point and nothing at another point, to even that out, because you can't change moment arms if you're doing the movement the same. Again, when we're talking free weights, dumbbells, all that kind of stuff, to even it out, let's make the weight get heavier in our hand as we go through the motion. So why doesn't it make sense? If you've watched the first 2 videos, this should already make sense as you look at this. So if you look at the line of force, so the line of force for a converging press, again, there's going to be a little of that intent thing. I'm not going to go into the video because, again, it'll make a subtle difference here, not as much as like with a barbell. But the line of force for a converging press is the path of the handle. And so that's where people get confused. They really don't think, just imagine, if I have a handle here at the top and I drop it, where does it go? The line of force pulls it right in the path that it's going to go in. So as far as you're concerned, whenever you're doing a chest press, the path that handle takes is the direction of the line of force. Yes, it can adjust a little bit with intent. You could change that at any point in time, again, depending on how much you're using triceps from the bottom, the middle, the top. But for the most part, if you could do that at any point in time, it's not going to have that huge of an effect. The line of force will pretty much always be, not pretty much always be, it will always be the exact same direction. So that's where it makes people's head hurt, is at no point in time as I go from the top to the bottom, does the line of force change. And as a result, it never changes its relative distance to the train joint. Now again, it'll change its distance as far as maybe triceps are involved. So again, if we look at the distance of this line of force at the bottom, at the middle, at the top, yes, it does change as far as relative to the elbow joint. So you can make an argument that basically there's different levels of torque at that elbow joint through the ranges of motion. But if we're talking about a chest press, hammer strength chest press, plate loaded chest press, which is the whole point of all these videos, that line of force never changes distance at any point in time in the range of motion. So if I'm at the bottom of a chest press, so hopefully this all makes sense. Here's the upper arm, here's the lower arm, and I draw the moment arm. Where is the moment arm? About a 90-degree-ish angle. This is the moment arm. So let's call that right around 90. So that's the moment arm. So if I go, so there's the line of force. So again, where people get confused on this part, the line of force in our hand, because that's where you're holding the load, that's the only contact point you have with your body in your hand, is always the path of the converging machine. So hopefully, again, to make sense if you haven't watched the beginning, bird's eye view, this would be actually someone sitting up. We're looking right straight down from the ceiling, the top of their head. Let's say they're in a hammer strength press here or something. This is their hand at the bottom. This is their hand in the middle. This is their hand at the top. I actually measured to make sure the limbs were consistent at all the different ones. So this is typically how it would look if, again, the path or the arm of the machine is going like this. So again, if I draw that line of force, so this is where the line of force is for all of these. So hopefully that makes sense. If I say, okay, well, where's the line of force for the hand? It's right there. So there's that moment arm. Where's the line of force for the hand? So there's the moment arm. So for all 3 of these positions, the moment arm to the shoulder joint never changes, because your shoulder joint also never changes position. The difference why there's a different moment arm and different amounts of torque at the elbow is because your elbow moves. So the line of force doesn't move, but your elbow does move. So as your elbow changes positions, you're going to get different moment arms. But considering the shoulder joint never moves and that line of force never changes direction or location, then you're gonna have a consistent moment arm from top to bottom. So what does that mean? If the weight in your hand, this is why double makes sense, stayed exactly the same the whole time, which for most machines it doesn't, but for some it actually could, for like a pin-loaded machine. If the weight stayed exactly the same in your hand the whole time, there's the same amount of torque the entire time through the entire range of motion. So again, the whole reason we change and use bands is because torque is so heavy at the bottom and so small at the top that we want to, how do we have torque more even? We make the load heavier, considering that's half of the equation. Whereas this, torque is consistent the whole time. So then we're looking at a single joint, we look at the chest joint, what else happens in this position? Well, we're coming to a fully shortened or near fully shortened pec. And again, like I said, it doesn't make any sense to have zero load there, but it certainly doesn't make sense to have the same load here. Your pec is weaker here for sure than it is for here, and having the same joint torque the whole time actually doesn't make any sense. So just a machine in and of itself, if the load was exactly the same the whole time, it's already not a great machine from an efficiency standpoint to match what your body's capable of doing. So you guys might have to watch that one back a couple times, leave some comments or leave some questions in the comment section for something that is confusing. So again, hopefully again, this already without a band isn't a great efficient profile. If you add a band to the top of this, then basically the load in your hand is gonna get heavier the whole time. And again, most of these drawings, we're keeping the load consistent. But if we added a band to this, so torque would go up through the entire range of motion. Now what already happens, this is the part that I'll finish with and keep kind of brief. I could do a separate video on this. But if we're looking at the average hammer strength chest press, so let's say we're doing the kind of, whatever, it's almost flattish. It kind of goes like this. Or even if we're doing an incline, it kind of goes like this. We've got something where here is the arm, here is the plate. Here is the axis. I'm not even gonna draw you. Here is the arm, here is the plate at the top. Why did I do that? That is the worst plate ever. Here's the plate at the top. But so let's just say that's where the plate's loaded on that point there. So if we look at the actual load that's basically given in your hand, if we look at the line of force from these, which will pretty much only be, you're getting torque from this machine, but these plates do not create the same torque at the joint the whole time. The moment arm at the bottom of a hammer strength chest press is this length. The moment arm at the top of a hammer strength chest press is this length. So it's basically twice as long of a moment arm, twice as much torque here, all other things being the same, twice as much load into your hand. So again, all those examples I gave, for a converging press, if the weight stayed the same the whole time in your hand, it's still not a very efficient profile. Now, if we use a hammer strength, the weights, again, I'm making up for this example, might not quite be doubled, but the weight is actually getting heavier. If you took a little scale in your hand, again, for one that matches this setup where the plate horizontally gets further away from the axis, the weight in your hand actually gets heavier through the range of motion. So a converging press with the same weight the whole time in your hand already isn't very efficient. The hammer strength makes it less efficient because it actually gets heavier in your hand to the top. And then if you put a band on top of that, it would basically be triple inefficient. So again, same weight, inefficient. Hammer strength, making it heavier to the top already with the plate, expressing force at the joint axis of the machine, makes it double inefficient. Then you put a band on top of that, triple inefficient. So basically, if you put a band on top of a hammer strength, the load that you're gonna be using is determined solely by what can you tolerate here. And what's the issue with that? You're completely undertraining this. It's not the fact that this is too heavy, you're making this too light. So again, most people tend to agree, smart people aside, you have the most growth opportunity in training muscles through their lengthened and mid-range. So if you select a load that's basically by, can I complete the rep here, you're only challenging the muscle in the fully shortened position. You're not challenging it at all in the fully lengthened position. And again, that comes back to that efficiency thing. Now, I said in the very beginning of all this mess, where would this possibly make sense? Well, it makes sense if it matches your goal. So for whatever reason, I'm not saying this is good, bad, you shouldn't do it or whatever. Someone says, well, I just really want to challenge that spot. Well, that will really, really freaking challenge that spot. So if you, for whatever reason, just want to train this position and make it hard as hell as you possibly can to fully contract and fully shorten your pecs, and maybe people can make the argument that's good for metabolic, for pump work, whatever. I'm not going into whether you should or shouldn't do it. I'm going in to have clarity of your goal. If your goal is to have an efficient exercise for your chest through the full range of motion, plate converging stuff doesn't make sense. Plate-loaded hammer strength converging stuff makes less sense, and then plate-loaded hammer strength stuff with a band makes the least amount of sense. But if you want to challenge the shit out of that position, then put some bands on some hammer strength and have at it. And that could make for a cool little metabolic drop set. Really, really challenging here, then take a band off and just go whatever you can, and then when you're done at the top, then finish with some partials. I mean, that's hard. That would be a very long set. You get a nasty pump. I'm not saying that would necessarily lead to growth. It depends on a whole lot of other stuff, but that is a good way to get a nasty pump. So that wraps all this mess up. Hopefully that makes a whole lot of sense. If you watch the first TikTok where basically I just said, trust me in this 2-minute clip, and I'll briefly explain why it doesn't make any sense to ban converging plate loaded presses, maybe you just stopped there and that would be the more simple version. But if you've made it through this whole mess, now you have a deeper understanding. And if you watched all this, don't forget to like, subscribe, share with some fellow nerds. Don't send this to anybody that says, but Ronnie, that's a good reason to do stuff. But again, not really lending itself to a deeper understanding. Till the next one, guys, enjoy.